I'd you take your Bibles, please, and turn to Numbers, the 16th chapter. We're still in lesson number 4. We have a few more questions to deal with you have pages 3 and 4 of your outline. And we talked about the censers. And we think things that are holy or dedicated unto God, so they're just separated, and sometimes we have a concept that are not usable, that are dedicated to God, they're not going to be used in connection with God, especially the censers of the people who rebelled, as they commanded by God to put their incense on that and find out who's God's going to consider as holy, separated unto him. Especially as the conflict between the Levites and the priest, Aaron's sons, and that became a problem with Korah. And we found out what happened to them, those who indeed offered the incense. Those 250 men did not swallow up in the land, in the ground. They were burnt with fire. They died in the bayou, burnt with fire from heaven. But the land, the ground swelled up, and which Moses said, this is not going to be a common death. It's not something common that will happen to mankind. And that's how those who are connected with Korah, like Dothan, Abiram, and we saw even their wives and their children, infants, were swallowed up that day. Consequences of sin, the parents, sometimes the children experience that. And we talked about the fact that what a sad thing, because these parents may have gotten to the point, well, we're not going to the land of Canaan anyway, so let's rebel now and get our way. But who suffered with that? The very ones who could have gone into the land of Canaan, maybe as orphans, but they'd be taken care of. So we just say, well, what happened to the censers? And we talked about last week. So what happened to them? They were made plates. They were then changed their form, melted down, and made plates to cover the altar. I think the altar of incense. And what was indeed that purpose? Why did they do that? It's a memorial. What were they to remember? All right, verse 16, chapter 16, in verse 40, he says, to be a memorial unto the children of Israel to the end that no stranger. Who would be a stranger? Right. Strangers sometimes are non-Jews. This passage, that indeed was a stranger not of the seed of Aaron. You're a stranger when you talk about offering this incense. That doesn't belong to you, Levites. You're a stranger. No, we're tribes of Israel. You're a stranger. That's the memorial. That's what they were to remember. You'll come near to burn incense before Jehovah, that be not as Korah and as his company, as Jehovah spake unto him by Moses. So God commands them to turn these plates that were once censers of the rebellious ones to their, indeed, cover the altar of incense, so that could be a memorial. They're looking at something physical to remind them of something that they were not to do. And we talked about that. Sometimes we condemn people because they see things and that is a memorial of something else, religiously. And we realize as the people of God now, under a system of the New Testament, those things, we don't do that. But Old Testament, they had all sorts of memorial. They had tassels on their garments to remind them about the law that they were not to forget. And that's how God dealt with his people. He doesn't deal with his people as a theocracy today. We have a division between government and the church. Church is not involved in the things that are involved with the people under the law of Moses were. So it's a different system. It's a different kingdom. It is a spiritual kingdom. But we're just looking at principles that it wasn't inherently evil for them to be having something there to be looking at. But as we see with the brazen serpent, when you start worshiping it, it's just a piece of brass. It was just a piece of brass. And that's what we do. We start worshiping things and forget about God. Well, here were the plates to surround the altar, that Levites, you don't get close to the altar of incense as far as offering up incense. That's not yours to do. Whose work was that to do that? Aaron and his sons. And so we see that is what would take place there. Now, question number 14. What message do they convey? You can't offer the incense, Levites. Who were the people who suffered on this day of testing besides Korah, Dathan, and Abiram? We talked about, verse 27, that the wives and the children, they suffered as they stood at the tents, and they were consumed. But what others do we hear about in this text, and we read about, who suffered on this day, talking about the time frame of the, because something happened the next day that I'm talking about. They murmured. And what did they accuse Aaron and Moses of doing? You killed the people of God. We killed the people of God. Yeah, didn't you say, let no common death happen to them? And if they die a common death and God hasn't chosen us and working through us to guide you, they said, you're the problem. You're the reason. And so what immediately starts happening? The plague is breaking out. And what's Moses sends Aaron to do? Take us your censer, and you offer incense in the tabernacle in the most holy place. No, you take the censer to the people. You offer that incense. And of course the plague has begun. Verse 47, Aaron took as Moses spake and ran in the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague was begun among the people, and he put on the incense to what? Make atonement for the people. We talk about incense, offering up as prayers. But here's the idea of offering up unto God for atonement for the people. And was this a big deal? He stood between whom? The dead and the living. Talk about filling the gap. Sometimes we fill the gap by praying for people and praying for the people might be at peace with one another, all those sort of things. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was what? It was stayed, it was stopped. And so that's a wonderful thing. And then we get the newspaper the next morning. How many died of that plague? 14,700. Besides them that died about the matter of Korah. One thing about the matter, another thing about murmuring against God. God said, this is what I want Moses to do. So in going against Moses and Aaron, as they were being directed by God, they were going against him. And therefore they paid a price for that. So uprising against authority, when that authority has been expressed through God, and he chose them. That's the problem we're going to have with kings becoming into being, because people want kings because they want to be like the nations about them. God was working pretty well through judges that he would choose. Then God would choose the king. And the first king that would have problems with him. David wasn't a perfect king or perfect man as he served as king. But God allows us to do these things, but there's a penalty being paid, and there's a lesson to be taught. And so when all said is done, they'll begin to forget about this. We'll see it pretty soon. They'll forget about this. When another problem comes on, I wish we could have died like the people who died before Jehovah. I wish we'd have died like them. We're studying what that was. What was it? Just a sudden, fire coming down and striking dead at 250, the earth swallowing up families connected with the rebellion, children and infants. And I wasn't there. I don't know how the sound was, but I'm sure it was frightening because people are trying to run away from this. They don't get caught up in that. God warned them to get away from the tents, and some did. But the point is, why would you ever wish you could experience that? Because your experience is big tough. We don't have water, and we don't have good food. And you brought us out here in the wilderness to die. I wish we'd have died like they did who died before Jehovah. So sometimes we can forget how horrible it is. We can then murmur against God the way it happened, and then 14,700, they die. Or we can just kind of go along, and when we have the next problem, I think that would have been a better death than what I'm going through. May have been. I don't know. But we think how horrible it is, how sudden it is, and then quietness. It's just, you're there with it, dealing with the results. Doesn't that happen after hurricanes and after tornadoes? And after that, you're just still dealing with the difficulty? When your car is stranded on 45 for 20-something hours trying to get out of town, and you never got out of town, and you're running out of gas, no food, there's nothing, no places to go to the restroom, and you're just dealing with this is what it's like. Or when a bomb lands on your city, this is what it's like. It's that afterwards that we're dealing with, and yet we will forget that, like the children of Israel, and murmur again and complain again, and it will cause consequences there too. The Bible says a lot about murmuring, doesn't it? And we'll talk about that in our sermon this morning on being light and being salt, and we'll deal with that a little bit. Question number 15. How did God vindicate the priesthood of Aaron? So you go into take care of chapter 16, and verse 50 says, Aaron returned to Moses under the door of the tent of meeting, and the plague was stayed. So, over. But what happens immediately now? How does God vindicate the priesthood of Aaron? Because the next two chapters are going to be dealing with that. To show this is my priesthood, distinctive from the Levites. So how did he do that?
He tells the heads of all the tribes, gather your rods, but Aaron's is the only one that blossomed. So it's God's sign that he chose Aaron among all the tribes of Israel.
That's right. Was that miraculous? Well, it wasn't just that. What else happened? What kind of almonds? They're already ripe. That's a miracle. Ripe almonds. We see the blossoms. Ripe almonds were on it. It wasn't just almonds. They're ripe. He just went through the process like turning water to wine. He went to the processes of them. We'll just make the wine. And all the process there, that's the miraculous part of this. It's confirmation from heaven. This just doesn't happen. And how come just one did that? One of the rods, 12 of them, representing the princes of each the father's houses. And here is Aaron representing what tribe? Levi. And he's the one, and they're going to keep that. And they're going to remember that, and that vindicates Aaron's priesthood. Above all, Israel is holy. Why do we need you? Korah would say. We're all involved in it. We're Levites, but all of Israel's holy. And it's just a remarkable thing. I think Numbers, Moses puts that in here, records it this way, as we have divided, because it followed on the hills of rebellion against them. And Moses laid up the rods before Jehovah in the tent of testimony. And on the morning, verse 8, behold, the rod of Aaron, it budded, it put forth buds, it produced blossoms and bare ripe almonds. That's a complete process. That's when I want to get them. And Moses brought out all the rods before Jehovah and the children of Israel. I want you to see this evidence. And Jehovah said unto Moses, put back the rod of Aaron before the testimony to be kept for a token against the children of rebellion, that thou mayest make an end of their murmurings. Remember this. And it's just a rod, but it's Aaron's rod, miraculously doing what it did. And it's just a message from God. What was the purpose of signs and wonders, healing people, raising people from the dead? Was it just to be something that just looked at itself and said, oh, that's mysterious, that's a miraculous thing? But it was a sign of something. They're signs. They signify something greater than itself. Like a sign that says a curvature, go 20, 15 miles or whatever that is. You're about ready to hit that kind of road. It signifies something better than a yellow and black sign. But what a sign is that? Ooh, Highway 5 is going to be something. We failed to look, what did it signify? That's what miracles were. And yet, there are strange things that happen today. God could do miracles. I know why he did them. Why we don't have miraculous gifts in the church today. Miraculous gifts. Where I could suddenly speak Chinese or some other, I butcher Spanish, don't handle that very well, but all of a sudden I'm fluent in it. That's just, that's something that's not done. It transcends natural law. A lot of things are mysterious, and we just conflate it all. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. I think it was really something for my sister-in-law to live 14 years after a brain tumor when she only had about 6 months to live. I'm grateful for that. She thought it was a miracle. Here we're praying for her. We were praying that doctors will find a way to do something, and they did at MD Anderson. Was that a miracle? Well, it was something that we weren't anticipating, or it's something that the doctors in parts of the country said there was no possibility she'll be a vegetable. She wasn't. She became functional, but the tumor came back again, and she was weaker, and she died. But she thought that was a miracle. And I think sometimes we conflate things like we're to be witnesses of Christ. Understand what people mean by that. But you'll realize witnesses were distinct from the people in the sense of what he meant by witnesses. The apostles were witnesses because they were eyewitnesses. They'd been with him before his death, through his death, now resurrection. They were eyewitnesses. And he revealed himself to the witnesses, not all the people, Acts tells us. What's the distinction? We're all followers. We're all witnesses for Christ. And it's the language, and that conflates things, and it leaves out the objective evidence that is missing from the gospel. We don't have these miracles happen because they confirm what? This. This is the confirmed gospel that's been written down for us. And the confirmation, do we believe in miracles? Yes, it had its place. But when that which is perfect is come, that which is perfect means complete, mature, the word is completed, then prophecies, knowledge, all those will cease. Knowledge will cease? No, the miraculous knowledge that one had as this was being written, it ceases because we have this now. And that's why we don't have the miraculous signs that we see people advocating today. It doesn't have. They're not like the ones we have. A lot of times I've got a tongue and I don't know what it means, but I'll interpret it later. That's not the way it was. It was the idea of edifying people through the teaching of the gospel and revealing the mind of God as Paul was writing the epistles out. But we have that complete now. But we need to be careful and realize what was the objective evidence that was only with the apostles, not the people, not Christians, we're disciples. That word witness was kind of, now you could die the martyr's death and be a witness. That's in the Bible. That word does that. But the rest of the time, the word witness is dealing with the apostles who were eyewitness testimony. And that's who converted the world in the first century, is the fact. And then the signs of an apostle I've given to you, Corinth. What was the sign of an apostle? Only through the laying on of whose hands could those miraculous gifts be given to another? Apostles. What does that signify? Here's my messenger. Listen to what he's teaching. It signifies something greater than just their miraculous ability. But when we say everybody's witnesses, and we make that personal evangelism, I understand that. I understand what they're meaning by that, but they've lost something that was very focused of showing evidence that this gospel is indeed from man. And the same is true as we see with what we call miracles. But I think this bud that blossomed, this rod, is indeed a miracle. It transcends natural law to have the next day one rod and going through the whole process, blossoming, ripe, almonds. Anything you want to add to that or a comment?
Here,
Yeah?
the Apostle John pretty much defines what you're saying in John 19:35. Speaking of himself, he says, "He that hath seen hath borne witness, and his witness is true, and he knoweth that he saith it's true, that ye also may believe." He's talking about himself, John, but he's witnessing the crucifixion of Christ.
Right.
He's given it to us even today so that we may believe.
Yeah.
That's what witnessing is about, so that we may believe.
That's true. And so how should we react? I wish we did it in the day of the miracles. We get sit back and say, what is that happening now? Because we have the confirmation now, and we should be happy with it to spread this message because it's confirmed already. And John's one of those confirmation points that we have. And that's how he vindicates the priesthood on this occasion. All right, question number 16. Why does Jehovah go into detail to distinguish the ministry between the priests and Levites as set apart from the stranger and the children of Israel? We've seen how he separates the idea of the Levites, they're strangers for the priesthood. But as he goes into detail about, and let's look at this connection. The children of Israel, verse 12 of chapter 17, behold, we perish, we are undone, we're undone. Everyone that cometh near unto the tabernacle of Jehovah dieth. Shall we perish, all of us? Don't people take things to extremes? It's been something that they just had to experience. Not only the plague, and now vindication, that's helping them get back to where they ought to be. But there's the idea, we're all going to die. No, you do things as God said to do. Aaron, in priesthood, takes care of that inside the tent of meeting, the altar. And the Levites were serving. They were helping with the sacrifices and so forth. So we come in chapter 18, and it says, thou and thy sons, thy father's house, shall bear the iniquity of the sanctuary. If you priest, you sin, you bear the iniquity of that. Not everybody's going to perish. It's just so complicated that we're all going to die. That's the way people go sometimes. And he's just bringing them back down to earth. And he says, and thy brethren also of the tribe of Levi, bring thou near with thee, that they may be joined unto thee and minister unto thee, but thou and thy sons with thee shall be before the tent of the meeting. So we get into chapter 18. And we begin to look at all the offerings that are offered, detailed offerings. And we read through that. And you'll read about a heave offering. You'll read about a wave offering. Does that interest you or bore you when I say that? Weave offering, heave offering, all these offerings. And sometimes, you kind of wave offering, heave offering, and you begin to realize that a lot of things were now given to the priest and the Levites for their sustenance. They did not have an inheritance as the other tribes did. And so we read of these details that indeed would go to the priest, heave offering, a wave offering, that the people would offer up with their peace offerings that we've seen happen. The fat would be put on the grill for God's offering. Then they would eat the shoulder, they would eat the breast, they would eat of the animal. That would go to the priest and the Levites. And they would have their portion. And what would happen is that, and indeed there will be the payment of the tenth that which go to the priest, the Levites would pay a tenth of a tithe. A tenth of a tithe. That would be their portion. And so all of these particular offerings were to be set forth that it was distinguishing between the Levites and the priests, even in their offerings, as well as their responsibility. I'm not going to kill everybody because we had a problem with the priesthood and the Levites. You're going to be responsible for what you're supposed to be doing, priest. You'll bear the iniquity. Verse 7 says, and now thy sons with thee shall keep your priesthood for everything of the altar, and for that within the veil, and ye shall serve. I give you the priesthood and a service of gift. The stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. And so it begins to be the heave offerings that we're talking about. As throughout this chapter. Verse 20, Jehovah said unto Aaron, thou shalt have no inheritance in their land, neither shalt thou have any portion among them. I am thy portion, and thine inheritance among the children of Israel. Things delivered to him, God's offerings would be shared. Those peace offerings would be shared with the priest and the Levites. Verse 21, on the children of Levi have I given all the tithe to Israel for an inheritance in return for their service, which they serve, even the service of the tent of meeting. And so, henceforth, the children of Israel shall not come nigh of the tent of meeting, lest they bear sin and die. Thus, the Levites will be involved in helping out. They would stay, Levites, the children of Israel stay away. But the Levites shall do service in the tent of meeting, and they shall bear the iniquity. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generation. The children of Israel, they have no inheritance. For the tithe of the children of Israel, which they offer as a heave offering, unto Jehovah I've given to the Levites for inheritance. Therefore I've said unto them, among the children of Israel they shall have no inheritance. 25. Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, moreover thou shalt speak again unto the Levites, and say unto them, when you take of the children of Israel the tithe which I've given you from among your inheritance, then shall you offer up a heave offering of it for Jehovah, a tithe of the tithe, and your heave offering shall be reckoned unto you, though it were grain or a threshing floor, as the fullness of the winepress. Thus shall you offer a heave offering unto Jehovah of all your tithes, which you received the children of Israel. And therefore you shall give Jehovah a heave offering to whom? Aaron the priest. Levites are collecting it. Aaron would benefit from it, because the Levites would pay a tenth of a tenth. A tithe. Distinguishing them. Having their orderly place. And these heave offerings could just be a tenth of what was been already offered unto God. So we're looking behind the scenes. Well, I come and bring my peace offerings. Well, a portion of that would be eaten by the priest and the Levites, as far as the shekel. He speaks here what those Jewish men over to pay the half shekel. All that will be distributed. And we're looking behind the scenes of how that is done. Verse 32, and you shall bear no sin by reason of it when you have heaved it from the best thereof, giving the best again. And ye shall not profane the holy things of the children of Israel, that ye die not. And verse 21 says, you shall eat it in every place, ye and your households, and your reward in return for your service in the tent of meeting. They had to be holy. They could not eat it being unclean, like they touched a dead body. There was the cleanliness of it, but there's the purity of it, but there's the holiness. It's set apart unto God, and that is to be distributed among those who are doing service. And the Aaron and his sons and the Levites, they were distinguished. That's why I think he does this. And of course, God had differences among them as well about their sacrifices. But chapter 18, the rest of that is just on the heels of Aaron's bud miraculously being set forth, and therefore he's making those distinctions. Now we come to chapter 19, and this is about the red heifer. And so we ask, as you read that, what was the purpose of the offering of the red heifer? How is it connected with purity in the camp?
it's sacrificed, and its ashes are used in water to purify the people.
Purify the people. And that water was sprinkled upon them, wasn't it? It was sprinkled upon them. And so we here have the commandment, as Joel said, of the sacrifice of that outside the camp. And then Eleazar, he comes back in the camp, idea continue there, but it'll be put with water and for impurity reasons, for purifying reasons. Verse 9 says, "A man that is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and lay them up without the camp in a clean place. And it shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for the water for impurity. It is a sin offering." So it's a water for impurity. And that they gather the ashes, shall wash his clothes, be unclean until evening, and be unto the children of Israel and unto the stranger that sojourn among them for a statute forever. So that would be more than the Levite is a stranger to Aaron's priesthood. It's people there. They were all engaged in some of the same sacrifices that the Israelites were, but this was one of purity. Verse 11, you touch a dead body, you're going to be unclean for 7 days. Verse 14, the law when a man dieth in a tent, one that cometh on the tent, everyone that's in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. You start the purifying process on what day? The third day. If you didn't do that, you won't be clean on the seventh day. So in the idea that every little thing you're going to be cleansed miraculously here, it's a cleansing of the people when they had touched dead bodies, bones out in the field, those who have died by the sword. They were unclean, and we call it sometimes ceremonial cleanliness. It's a ceremonial thing. But diseases can be passed that way, people in the tent, but that was the law that God gave. Verse 20, the man that shall be unclean and shall not purify himself, that soul shall be cut off from the midst of the assembly, because he hath defiled the sanctuary of Jehovah. The water for impurity hath not been sprinkled upon him. He is unclean. Now, when people were cut off from the assembly, what did that mean, David? They were put to death. Someone said, well, they were just separated from the sanctuary. And the Old Testament there, you're not allowed to go into the sanctuary. But here, and we see under the law of Moses, that's when it's supposed to be cut off, it kind of expresses things where we're talking about being separated from the people in a sense of being put to death. What interested me early on in my life as a preacher, some of the early books I read, I think those are impressionable to you. But I read one dealing with the Old Testament sacrifices and so forth and the law of Moses. And it challenged my thinking because I hadn't really thought about this before. There's a death penalty for every one of the Ten Commandments, an illustration of it in the Old Testament. Every one of them. You know, you have other images before, death penalty. You don't honor your father and mother, death penalty, rebellious son. Adultery, covetousness in the heart, greed. And there was death connected with that. And that's allowing us to know this is serious with God, where these commandments were set forth. So here was in the sense of impurity, because you're going to be sanctified, and God's tent is going to be sanctified, his people are going to be sanctified. And we'll talk about this as the purity of the body in the sense of ceremoniously, thank you, that we're talking about. So let's put it together as far as we're concerned. That helps us maybe understand how we should look at that, is how the inspired writer of Hebrews, how does the author of Hebrews use the red heifer as a contrast? That might help us understand why we might call it ceremonial cleansing. It was purity as far as dead bodies and so forth, touching them, or bones. So let's read together the the Hebrew writer, because he's contrasting it what Jesus accomplished. Verse 12, nor yet through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood entered in once and for all into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption. Now we think about the holy place. Where did he enter into? He went into heaven, did he? And he said, for if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling them that have been defiled, sanctify unto the cleanliness of the what? Flesh. How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish unto God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? Now I think we get a hold. It was of the flesh, but again, it was a ceremonial thing, because you start the purification process on the third day, and regardless of what happens on the seventh day, you're clean. If you don't, you're going to have to start the process again. You're not going to be considered clean after you've touched these things again. So how's the conscience distinguished from the flesh? They still had a conscience back here, but no, there's distinction here. This is what we call ceremonious cleansing the flesh, but the flesh is now contrasted with the spiritual part of man. Is that fair? We all have a conscience, but our conscience is cleansed because we realize we are sinners. That's a spiritual problem, and we recognize that. And the blood of bulls and goats is not going to take that away. Old law doesn't offer anything for that. And neither of the ashes of a red heifer. That's the point. He comes back to what we see in Numbers, and realize that it's not a cleansing of the flesh, it's a spiritual cleansing. So what we see in Peter, it's not the baptism saves us, not the putting away the filth of flesh. And that's where sprinkling that's the sprinkling of that water. And it's not cleansing of the flesh. It's an answer of a good conscience. A conscience again. A good conscience before God. And I want to be right with you, O God. And I know it's the spiritual. I've fallen short of the glory of God. I've sinned. And the only way to take care of that is through the blood of Christ. And I think the Hebrew writer brings that up very clearly. Any comments you want to add to that? Okay. We talked about being cut off and so forth. What month of the year did the people of Israel abide in Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin? I know our time is going to be cut short here, but as we go into the next chapter and so forth, what month of the year are we now dealing with? What year? It doesn't say it, does it? But what do you know it is? It's the 40th year. They're about ready to make their trip and complete the 4 years of wonder. We've been 38 years. There have been 2 years coming out of Egyptian bondage, but now we find ourselves going toward the land of Canaan. Turn with me to chapter 33 and see if this doesn't clear it for you. See, we look at the whole counsel of God, and sometimes we can learn things that are not written in one place. Notice in verse 36, they journeyed from Ezion Geber. They went forth south and realized, well, it's because we're going to have a problem with going through Edom. They're not going to let us go. And then they journeyed from Kadesh, verse 37. That's what we're getting ready to look at, chapter 20. And encamped at Mount Hor in the edge of the land of Edom. There's two possibilities for Mount Hor. This is probably I'm looking at one near Kadesh because of this point, not the one on the other side of Edom. And Aaron the priest went up, and that's to be connected with Petra, a very popular place for Mount Hor. Verse 38, and Aaron the priest went up into Mount Hor at the commandment of Jehovah, and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 5th month, on the first day of the month. We're on the first month. By the end of we're going to see where Aaron dies on Mount Hor. It's the 5th month. They get into the area where they're going to be able to go over Jordan in the 11th month of what year? Has to be the 40th. So we're in the 40th year, this first month that happens. And so who dies there? Who dies there in that first month? It's Miriam. Who's Miriam? Yeah, we've seen her before. Here's the sibling of Moses and Aaron, and she was buried there. Children of Israel, even the whole congregation came to the wilderness of Zin the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh. Now, Numbers 23 tells you they moved a lot of places, but Kadesh was their point. And what's so interesting about that, Kadesh is where they would send out the spies, and let's go take the land. Oh, if they just obeyed God. They didn't. The people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there, and there was no water for the congregation. So what happens? They begin to mourn, in which they died before Jehovah earlier. And we'll have to, our meeting starts Sunday, so we'll have 2 weeks to wait on that one. But we'll finish this lesson 4 and go into lesson 5 in a couple of weeks. Any comments or questions to tide us over for 2 weeks that you'd like to say? Okay, well, thank you for being here and participating.